All right, so Trump wins the 2024 election, and even before he's back in the Oval Office, he's stirring things up with Canada already. We're talking about that surprise Mar-a-Lago dinner with Trudeau,
Mm.
you know, super secretive, very hush-hush. And for this deep dive, we've got some really interesting intel from Canadian officials. Plus, we're bringing in an expert who knows Trump's styles. So let's get into it.
Yeah, what's really striking here is this whole dinner thing, it really shows you how Trump works. Personal relationships first, formal channels second. Catching everyone off guard. Remember that time he met with Kim Jong-un back in 18? Totally out of the blue, just like this?
Right, totally his style. So picture this Friday night.
Yeah.
Trudeau gets whisked away to Florida, private dinner with Trump, and very few people even knew about it beforehand. The Canadians were thinking, okay, immigration, that's going to be the main thing. But Trump had something else on his mind.
Fentanyl. That was a big issue for him. He made it clear that's his top priority when it comes to Canada, even more than immigration.
Yeah, that was a surprise to a lot of people.
It might seem kind of surprising at first, but when you think about it, the opioid crisis is just massive in the U.S. Trump has to show his base that he's being tough. And cracking down on fentanyl coming from Canada, well, that's the way to do it.
Okay, so fentanyl's front and center.
Yeah.
But here's where things get even more interesting. Trump just throws out this threat, a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods until the fentanyl and illegal immigration stop. But he doesn't actually say what he wants Canada to do. More border patrols, shutting down labs. It's like the classic Trump move, right?
It is, yeah. Think back to those trade negotiations with China. He comes out with a huge threat, grabs everyone's attention, creates leverage, then uses that to negotiate. It's like he's saying, look, I'm willing to go this far, so you better be ready to deal.
Okay, so how does Trudeau handle this? From what we're hearing, he focused on building a relationship with Trump and his team, highlighting all the good stuff between the U.S. and Canada, and he didn't let himself get dragged into a debate about tariffs, especially not at dinner, right?
Yeah, smart move. It's a tough situation. You want to show you're willing to work together, but you can't look weak. And you don't want to give away too much before the real talks even begin.
Speaking of working together,
Mm-hmm.
we've got these really interesting details from Dominic LeBlanc. He was one of the Canadian officials at the dinner. He said the mood was actually pretty warm, respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Even said Trump seems to like Trudeau, like a lot. And we all know how much Trump values those personal connections.
No, absolutely. He's all about loyalty and respect. Remember when he kept talking about his great relationship with Xi Jinping,
Yeah.
even while they were in that trade war? It's all part of his game. You build that personal connection, so then when the tough negotiations start, you've got that foundation of goodwill.
Right, makes sense. But not everyone was happy with Trudeau's approach. Pierre Poilievre, he's the conservative leader. He criticized Trudeau, said he went in from a position of weakness, thinks Canada needs to be way tougher with Trump.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Is it even possible to be tough but also diplomatic with Trump? I mean, Trudeau's trying to do both.
Right.
That's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk for sure. So it seems like it was more about setting the stage, less about striking an actual deal. Fentanyl is the big issue for Trump right now. He's using those tariffs as leverage. And Canada's trying to figure out how to deal with all this unpredictability.
And this is just the start. It's going to be fascinating to watch how this all unfolds.
Absolutely. What happens next?
Yeah.
You're going to stick with that sphere. Part 2 of this deep dive, we'll be looking at what those tariffs could actually mean and exploring what options Canada has. Buckle up. This is where things get really interesting. Okay, so we're talking about this 25% tariff threat. Trump's using it as a bargaining chip, basically. But let's think about what a tariff like that would actually mean for consumers, for businesses on both sides of the border.
Yeah, a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods. I mean, that's huge, right? We're not talking about just maple syrup or something. It's cars, lumber, energy, you name it.
Yeah, it's everything.
It would really hit both economies hard. The U.S. and Canada, their economies are so intertwined, you'd see disruptions in supply chains, prices would go up, and there could be job losses too, on both sides of the border.
Yeah, it's a pretty risky move. Even for Trump, right? I mean, think about it. His base, they're not going to be happy if prices on everything start going up.
Right, and wouldn't this also be a problem, like with international trade agreements and stuff?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
It's definitely a gray area legally. But Trump's never been afraid to push the boundaries. Remember those steel and aluminum tariffs a few years back? That whole thing turned into a trade war. This situation could easily escalate, too.
So what can Canada actually do here? They
Yeah.
can't just wait and see what happens, right?
Right. They've got a few options. The most obvious one. Try to negotiate with Trump and his administration. Put together a plan to address the fentanyl issue. And try to get those tariffs off the table.
Sounds simple enough.
Yeah, but it's not that easy. It's all about finding that balance. cooperating with Trump, but also standing up for Canada's interests.
That's got to be tricky with someone like Trump.
Totally. Another option is to fight back. Hit back with tariffs of their own on U.S. goods.
Like a tit-for-tat kind of thing.
Exactly. But that could make things worse, could escalate tensions, and hurt both economies even more. Nobody really wins in a trade war.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game. And then there's the legal route, right?
Oh, right. They could go to the World Trade Organization, challenge those tariffs, say they're illegal.
Think that would work?
It's a long shot, but it might buy them some time. But honestly, no matter what they do, Canada needs to be smart about this. Make the right moves, act decisively. The fentanyl crisis is a serious issue. They can't just ignore what Trump's saying.
Yeah, it feels like this whole thing, it's bigger than just fentanyl, It's about the whole relationship between the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, you're right. It's a test for them. This is what it's going to be like dealing with Trump again.
Can they be strong, independent, but also find a way to work with him?
The stakes are high, for sure. This could shape the future of their whole partnership.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. But before we get too deep into the politics, we can't forget about the human cost of this crisis.
Absolutely. It's easy to get lost in the numbers, the tariffs, the trade deals. But this is about real people, real families, people who are struggling with addiction, with loss.
Right, it's real tragedy. So let's shift gears for a bit. Let's talk about solutions. What can actually be done to tackle this crisis? We've been hearing about this opioid epidemic for years, but are things actually getting better?
That's the big question. And honestly, there's no easy answer. It's going to take a lot of different things working together.
Like what kinds of things? So we've talked about what the U.S. could do, but what about Canada? What can they do to stop all this fentanyl from coming across the border?
Well, they definitely need to do more to catch it at the border, disrupt those supply chains, crack down on the criminal networks that are trafficking it. But it can't just be about enforcement,
Right, because even if you stop one shipment, there's always going to be another one, right?
Exactly. You got to get to the root of the problem.
So what else can they do?
Prevention and treatment programs, that's key.
Okay, what does that look like?
More harm reduction services, support for people who are struggling with addiction, and we got to work on destigmatizing substance use disorders.
Yeah, it's a public health crisis, not just a criminal justice issue.
Right, exactly.
And this is where the U.S. and Canada working together, that could make a real difference.
Absolutely. They've got a long history of cooperating on stuff like this.
Cross-border issues.
Right. So they need to use that experience.
Defend some common ground.
And work together to come up with solutions.
It's interesting to think, what if this fentanyl crisis could actually bring the U.S. and Canada closer?
Yeah. What if it forced them to cooperate more? Not just on this issue, but on other things too.
Like climate change or trade.
Right. Instead of dividing them.
It could actually make their relationship stronger.
It's a tough situation, no doubt. But the stakes are too high to just give up.
Too many lives are at stake.
We've given you a lot to think about in this deep dive.
It's complicated stuff for sure.
Yeah. But now it's up to you to connect the dots.
Think about what you've learned.
The different sides of the story.
The possible solutions.
What could happen in the long run?
We've given you the tools.
Now use them.
Keep asking questions, stay informed, and stay engaged. Because what happens next? It's going to affect both countries. And it's going to affect the lives of so many people caught in the middle of this fentanyl crisis.